Hello and welcome to this end-to-end demo featuring Outer Loop Development Cycle with Odoo. Before I begin to talk about Odoo, I would like to talk about what an Outer Loop Development Cycle is. Now, it is simply the phase in your application development lifecycle right before you are ready to release. It involves activities that are done at a larger team level, such as code review, integration testing, security and compliances, etc. Now, let's talk about an application developer who is supposed to review an application developed by a fellow teammate. This application, once ready for production, will be deployed in a cloud native environment such as OpenShift or Kubernetes. This developer wants to review the application in a production like environment, but finds it difficult to do so because of the complexities involved in running an application in such an environment. Now, this is where Odoo comes in. With the help of Odoo and DevFile, this developer can run their application on a cluster with a single command. Now, before we begin with our demo, we'll need to install the Odoo binaries first. You can take a look at odoo.dev website, the installation guide, which gives you instructions on installing Odoo on various standard operating system. In my case, since I already have Odoo installed, I'm going to skip this step. Now, I am going to work with a simple Go application which prints out a custom hello world message for its users. I'm provided with a Docker file and a dev file. Now, Odoo uses dev file to understand the development environment it should create for you on the cluster. Uh, let's take a look at the dev file before we do anything else. Now, dev file is an open standard definition for defining your development environment as code. Dev file can help us define the components required to run our application on the cluster and the commands that should run to build and test it. And those are the important things that we're going to take a look at here. Since you are going to work in a cloud native environment, our application will essentially run inside a container. And our container requires an image to run. So here we are defining an image component that uses the Docker file that we have locally, and it will use this image that it builds inside the deployment resource. This deployment resource will serve our application. Now, in order to access the application, we need to define a service. So this service will expose the deployment. And we're also defining an ingress resource, which will allow us to access the application via a domain name. So the other part of the dev file is commands. So we have defined an apply command for all of the components that we just saw. We have build image for building an image. Then there is Kubernetes deployment service and URL to create the corresponding resources. And we are defining a deploy command, which is a composition of all the commands that we just mentioned. These commands will be run in order. Um, Other than this, we also have defined variables over here. These variables will be used throughout the dev file. We have defined a container image. So this is the name of the image, and our image will be pushed to key.io registry. This is the resource name for all the Kubernetes resources that we are going to create. Container port will be used by our container to expose the endpoint, and domain name is what we're going to use to access our application. There's also information such as metadata and schema version and starter project, but we don't need to bother with that for now. So for running my application on the cluster, I am going to use a local Minikube cluster. I'm quickly going to check its status, make sure it's running, which it is. Now, when I'm going to build an image, it will be pushed to a key.io registry. So I'll need to log into key.io first. So we log in, which was successful. Now, without further ado, we will finally run the Odoo deploy command to run our application on the cluster. So this will build the image locally, push it to the container registry, and then use the image to create the resources that we defined in our dev file. So One thing to note here is we are creating an ingress resource. So for Minikube, you would need to enable the ingress add-on to make sure that your Kubernetes cluster can understand this resource and serve your purpose. So we will ping the URL, the domain name that we had defined in our dev file. I'm going to curl it. Let's see. So it prints the message hello Parthvi, and it seems like our application is working. So you can also run Odo list component to list all the components that are currently running on your cluster. We have demo.go, which is our application. It is running in deploy mode. This indicates that we are currently working in the outer loop development cycle. This component is managed by Odo. You can also run Odo describe component to learn more about your dev file. It talks about the features supported by dev file, the container components, and the Kubernetes components that are deployed by your uh, that can be deployed by your dev file. Now that I'm satisfied with my review, the application is working as expected. I am going to run the Odo delete component command to delete the resources that we created from the cluster. Uh, we say yes, and it seems like there are still a few resources left. We can delete them with this particular command. So that's all for this demo. Odo, it really is a fast and iterative CLI tool for application developers to run their inner loop and outer loop cycle in a cloud native environment by abstracting away all the complexities. You can visit um, the audio.dev website to learn more about it. We also have a few quick start guides that you can try out. That's all for today's demo. Thank you very much.